I am 75 years old, and until recently, I ran Lloyd Architects in Deltona. Yes, that's my last name on the sign for the building I designed 42 years ago. Once it was just me, a drawing board, and the ambition of a young architect just back from Europe with burning eyes and lots of ideas. Now we have a staff of 50 people and projects all over the East Coast. Every morning I'd get to the office before anyone else. Old habits, you know. My fingers aren't as nimble as they used to be, but my mind is still sharp. I remember every project, every building we built over the years, every curve, every supporting structure, every shadow falling from the eaves at noon. Architecture isn't just lines on paper, it's a story told with stone and glass. I was especially proud to have created a company that I would one day pass on to my son Percy, my only child. My wife Sybil died when he was 12, and I raised him alone. God knows I did the best I could. I paid for the best schools, university internships. Percy was always a gifted boy, but he was fickle. At 16, he wanted to be a painter. At 20, he was studying biology, and by 25, he was finally interested in architecture. I rejoiced, even though I knew it was more of a practicality than a passion. But we all make choices. Percy joined the company 8 years ago. I wouldn't say he was an outstanding architect. He lacked that inner fire that distinguishes a good professional from a genius. But he turned out to be an excellent manager. Methodical, attentive to detail, with a good sense of people. I was happy to gradually hand over the reins of operations to him, leaving him in charge of creative direction and work with key clients. We were able to maintain a balance. I was pleased. And then there was Bridie Kendall. They'd met at some charity event. Percy was 35. She was 28. A beautiful, ambitious woman with a business degree and a sharp mind. Percy fell in love instantly. I was happy for him. My son had always been withdrawn, work-focused, with a small circle of friends. Bridie brought energy and color into his life. At our first meeting, she charmed me with stories about her work as a consultant at an investment firm and her fascination with modern art. She listened intently to my stories about the early days of the company, asking intelligent questions. There was a keen interest in her eyes, but there was something else, something cold and calculating. Maybe it was just the old man's nagging, but I'd spent enough time in meeting rooms to recognize predators. They married quickly, after only 6 months of knowing each other. The wedding was elegant and expensive. Percy was glowing with happiness. I gave a touching speech, though inside I was gnawing with doubt. My late friend Randall always said, "Winthrop, listen to your intuition. It's never let you down before." And my intuition was screaming that something was wrong with Bridie. The first year of their marriage went relatively smoothly. I saw my son less often. They'd bought a house in the suburbs and had a new social circle. Bridie often mentioned her successful friends, their accomplishments and status. Percy was changing. New suits, new car, new manners. Not that it was bad, just unfamiliar. On their second wedding anniversary, Bridie brought up the subject of working for our company. "Winthrop, I so admire what you've created," she said, covering my hand with hers, "and I'd like to contribute to the family business." Percy supported the idea with enthusiasm. I hesitated. We had no open positions at a level commensurate with Bridie's ambitions, but to refuse meant creating unnecessary tension. "Of course," I replied. "Why don't we start with the marketing assistant position? It would give you a chance to familiarize yourself with our business." Her smile faded slightly, but she agreed. A week later, Bridie started working at Lloyd Architects. I have to admit, she was efficient. In 3 months, Bridie completely revamped our marketing strategy, brought on several new clients, and even organized a successful trade show for our projects. Her energy was contagious. Employees admired her. Clients were fascinated. 6 months later, I promoted her to head of marketing. It was well-deserved, but Bridie's appetite was growing. At one of our weekly lunches with Percy, a tradition we'd maintained for years, I noticed he looked tense. "What's bothering you, son?" I asked as we settled into our favorite Italian restaurant. Percy stirred his coffee longer than necessary. "Bridie thinks she's ready to take on more responsibility in the company. She's great at marketing," I replied cautiously. "She's thinking about the CFO position." I almost choked on my wine. "CFO? Hugh has 40 years of experience in finance. He's been with me since the early days." Hugh was talking about retirement. Percy avoided my gaze. and Bridie has a background in finance. Her recommendations to optimize the marketing department's expenses increased our profits by 12%. There's a difference between managing a department's budget and the finances of an entire company. I tried to speak softly. Hugh has been my anchor in stormy times. His knowledge and experience are invaluable. Father, Percy's voice took on a steely note. Bridie is the future, Hugh is the past, as are many of the management practices in the company. I looked at my son carefully. When had he gotten so cold? So alien? Were those her words or yours? He blushed slightly, but he stood his ground. Mine, ours. Bridie and I talk a lot about the future of the company. We have a vision. And in that vision, there's no room for the founder? My voice shook, though I tried to hide my resentment. Percy finally met my gaze. Of course there is. You are the heart and soul of Lloyd Architects. But maybe it's time to focus on the creative side and let us handle the administrative side. I realized it wasn't a question, but a done deal. When and how did that happen? When did my son start talking to me as an honorary retiree instead of a company executive? Hugh retired a month later, although I suspect he was offered a generous package to speed up the decision. Bridie took over his office, a spacious one overlooking the river. The first thing she did was change all the furniture, install new state-of-the-art lighting, and commission an abstract painting that took up an entire wall. Spectacular, I'll give you that. And so was Bridie herself. She was quick on the uptake. She audited all our contracts, reorganized the finance department, implemented a new accounting system. It looked impressive on paper. Board meetings turned into speeches where she presented graphs, forecasts, and innovative strategies. Percy sat next to me, looking at his wife with pride, and I felt like I was slowly losing control of something I'd spent a lifetime creating. At first it was the little things. Bridie started scheduling appointments at times when I would normally be working on sketches. My projects began to receive less resources and attention. The young architects I hired and trained now reported to Percy or directly to Bridie. The day I turned 75, the company threw a celebration. Bridie gave a moving speech about my contribution to Deltona architecture, my legacy. She presented me with a gold watch. Elegant, expensive, engraved to the founder from a grateful family. A symbolic gesture that spoke louder than words. Your time has passed. After the party, I lingered in the office. I wandered the empty hallways, touching the walls, looking at photos of our projects. Each building is a part of me. Each line is an extension of my thoughts. I stopped in front of a scale model of our first major project, a community center in the heart of Deltona. Fragile white walls, miniature trees, tiny human figures, a world created by my hands. The next morning, upon arriving at the office, I discovered that my pass didn't work. The security guard, a new guy I didn't know, called upstairs with an apologetic look. 5 minutes later, Percy came down. Father, he looked embarrassed. I'm sorry about the misunderstanding. Your pass should have been renewed. Bridie had implemented a new security system. We went up to my office in silence. Something had changed, something subtle but important. I could feel it in the air, in the way the staff looked at me with respect, but no longer in awe. I was a living legend, a museum piece, not the current head of the museum. That evening, I took Percy out to dinner, without Bridie. He accepted reluctantly, saying he was busy. We met at an old steakhouse celebrating his first independent project. What's going on, Percy? I asked bluntly as the drinks were brought to us. I feel like I'm being pushed out of my own company. Percy sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture he'd learned from me. No one's pushing you out, Father. It's just that the company's evolving. Bridie's bringing in fresh ideas, new approaches. Times change. Sherman. Times change, but not principles, I replied. Lloyd Architects has always emphasized quality over speed, creativity over templates. I see our projects changing. They're becoming faceless. They're becoming competitive. Percy's voice became irritated. We can't afford to spend months on sketches when other firms are producing designs in weeks, an hour, and they get one-size-fits-all boxes instead of buildings with soul. Soul doesn't pay the bills, Father. We fell silent. Once Percy and I spoke the same language. He used to sit next to me over the blueprints and ask, "Why is this line here?" And I would explain to him how light would fall through the windows, how people would move in this space, how the building would breathe. Once he understood. "It's Bridie's influence," I said quietly. "Huh, she's changing you. Changes our company." Percy put down his fork. His face went rigid. "Bridie does what needs to be done. She sees perspectives you don't see. We can become the largest architectural firm on the East Coast. But to do that, we have to change. Even if that change means losing the soul of the firm, even if that change means leaving behind outdated ways of doing things." Percy looked me straight in the eye. "Including yours, Father." I felt something snap inside. My son, my blood, was looking at me like an obstacle, like a problem to be solved. We finished dinner in tense silence. Before he left, he said, "I respect everything you've built, but now it's our turn to lead the company forward." He meant himself and Bridie, not him and me. That night I sat in my study at home for a long time, going through old photographs. Percy at 5 years old on my shoulders. Percy at 12, serious and quiet after his mother's death. Percy at 20, getting his diploma. Percy beside me at the opening of the new Lloyd Architects office. So many memories, so much hope. I realized I wasn't just losing the company, I was losing my son. After our tense dinner with Percy, there was a fragile truce in the office for a few weeks. I came in every morning, worked on my projects, and pretended not to notice how I was being systematically relegated to the periphery of my own company. Bridie was impeccably polite in our rare encounters, always interested in my health and always mentioning what a valuable part of Lloyd Architects' legacy I was. That's right, legacy, as if I was already part of history, not the present. On Wednesday, I found an elegant cream-colored folder on my desk. Inside was a glossy booklet with the company's new logo. Instead of the classic Lloyd Architects in the distinctive typeface that I had designed myself 40 years ago, it now read LA Design Group in a minimalist font. No discussion, no consultation, just a fait accompli. I headed immediately to Percy's office. His secretary, the new girl Bridie had hired, said he was in a meeting with clients. I knew that wasn't true. Through the glass walls of his office, I could see my son sitting at his desk, looking over documents. "I'm going in anyway," I said as I walked past her. She jumped up but didn't dare stop me. Percy looked up as I entered, and his face reflected irritation for a moment before he put on a mask of polite interest. "Father, I have a call in 5 minutes. Is it something urgent?" I placed the booklet on his desk. "When was this decision made?" Percy glanced at the new logo and sighed. "At the last board meeting. We were going to discuss it with you, but you canceled because of your doctor's appointment." "I canceled one meeting in the last 3 months and you decide to completely change the company's identity?" I tried to speak calmly, but I could feel the blood rushing to my face. 42 years it's been Lloyd Architects. My name, my reputation, my legacy. The name is still there, just in a more modern form. Percy pointed to the initials LA. The rebranding was necessary. Market research showed that our old logo was perceived as outdated. We were losing young customers. "What market research? Who did it? Why don't I know anything about it?" Percy looked at his watch. "Father, Bridie will be able to explain all the details to you. She was in charge of the project. Now I really need to get ready for the call." I stood looking at my son and didn't recognize him. When did he become so, corporate? So indifferent to what was important to me? "You don't even see fit to apologize for making that decision behind my back?" I asked quietly. Percy finally looked up from his papers. "I apologize if it hurt your feelings, but business is business. We have to move forward." I left his office with a heavy heart. On the way back to my office, I noticed the staff furtively watching me. The news of the rebranding had obviously already spread around the office. I wondered how many more decisions had been made without my knowledge. That same day, I learned the answer to that question. My faithful assistant, Claire, who had worked with me for almost 30 years, approached me with a concerned look. "Mr. Lloyd," she said quietly as she closed my office door, "do you know about the Harrison project?" Archibald Harrison was one of my oldest clients and friends. We've been designing for his family for 3 generations, from the first office building to the family estate. Of course, I'm personally working on a new cultural center for his foundation. What's up with him? Claire looked confused. The project has been handed over to Bridie's team. She said it was your decision, that you wanted to focus on fewer projects. I felt a cold rage rising inside me. To hijack a project without my consent is already a serious breach of professional ethics, but to use my name to do so, to lie on my behalf. Thank you, Claire. Could you contact Mr. Harrison and set up a meeting? Tell him it's personal. As soon as she left, I got out my notebook and started writing. Rebranding without consulting me. Hijacking Harrison's project. What else? I started remembering the oddities of the last few months. Diverted calls, canceled meetings, reducing my access to financial records, the disappearance of my name from press releases, all pointing to my systematic ousting from the company. Archibald agreed to meet me at his club that same evening. Despite his 82 years, he retained his clarity of mind and characteristic directness. Winthrop, old fellow, what's going on in your company? He asked as we settled in the leather armchairs by the fireplace. This young lady, your sister-in-law, told me that you had decided to step back from active project management. I didn't believe it for a second. You'd rather die with a pencil in your hand than step down voluntarily? I told him about the situation, not hiding my frustration and anger. A palace coup, Archibald shook his head. She was very persuasive, you know. She talked about new directions, innovations, modern trends. She even showed some preliminary sketches. Not your style at all, by the way. Cold, functional boxes with no soul. I was disappointed. Did you agree to change the design? I asked anxiously. No, of course not. I said I would think about it, and I decided to talk to you first. We've known each other too long to trust middlemen, even if they are family members. I was relieved. At least here Bridie hadn't gotten her way. Thank you, Archie. I'll personally work on your project as planned. But what are you going to do about this whole situation? Archibald looked at me carefully. This is your company, Winthrop. Your name. Your legacy. I sighed. I don't. I never thought I'd be fighting for a place in my own company, especially against my own family. The next morning, I arrived at the office earlier than usual. I needed time to think, to plan my actions. I wasn't going to give up without a fight. As I walked past the conference room, I noticed the lights were already on. The door was ajar, and I could hear Bridie's voice. She was on the phone, loud and confident. Yes, we are ready to unveil the new concept next Tuesday. No, Mr. Lloyd will not be attending the presentation. We're moving in a new direction, and frankly, his vision is no longer in line with current market demands. I froze. She was talking about the Campbell's project, a large mixed-use development I've been developing for the past 6 months. My concept had already been approved by the clients. We were at the detailing stage. Of course, we understand your concerns, Bridie continued. But believe me, our new team will offer a much more innovative and cost-effective approach. Winthrop Lloyd is a legend, and we all respect his contribution to architecture. But times are changing, and the company must adapt. I quietly stepped back, feeling the blood pounding in my temples. This wasn't just a simple, underhanded game anymore. This was an open power grab. Instead of going to my office, I headed for the exit. I needed fresh air, space to think. I wandered the streets of Deltona, past buildings, many of which I had designed myself. Each one was part of my soul, my vision for the city. And now Bridie was trying to erase that legacy, to replace it with her modern and cost-effective approach. When I returned to the office around noon, an unpleasant scene awaited me. Bridie was standing by Claire's desk, looming over my assistant. "This is unacceptable," she said in a harsh tone. "You can't just arrange meetings on behalf of the company without consulting management." "I've always arranged meetings for Mr. Lloyd," Claire replied calmly, though her hands were trembling slightly. "That's my job. Your job is to follow the new protocols. All meetings with key clients must be approved by me or Percy." I approached them, not hiding my irritation. "What's going on here?" Bridie turned to me with a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Ah, Winthrop, I was just explaining to Claire the new meeting coordination system. For better workflow organization?" "You mean for better control over my client contacts?" I parried. Bridie's smile became strained. "To ensure consistency in our communication. We can't have clients receiving conflicting messages. Conflicting messages. Like when you tell them I've been pulled away from projects I'm working on? I noticed several employees nearby froze listening to our conversation. Bridie noticed it too. I know what, let's discuss it in your office, she suggested, maintaining a semblance of professionalism. As soon as the door closed behind us, her mask fell. What are you doing, Winthrop? Undermining my authority in front of my staff? Arranging meetings behind my back? I'm doing my job, I replied, trying to remain calm. A job I've been doing for 40 years before you came along. And I will continue to meet with clients with whom I have a long-standing relationship without your permission. Bridie crossed his arms across his chest. Percy agrees that the company needs a centralized system for managing client relationships. We can't let personal preferences influence business decisions. Personal preferences? I felt my anger boiling up inside me. You call 40 years of professional experience and reputation a personal preference? The client relationships I've built over decades? That's exactly what I'm talking about. Bridie's voice took on a condescending tone. You're too emotionally attached to certain projects and clients. It prevents you from objectively assessing business opportunities. Modern business requires flexibility and pragmatism, and not honesty and loyalty to your principles. I shook my head. What did you tell the Campbells? That my concept was outdated? That I was too old to understand current trends? Bridie turned slightly pale. Have you been eavesdropping on my conversations? I overheard you discrediting me in front of clients. Clients who chose to work with Lloyd Architects because of my reputation and my vision. She took a deep breath, clearly trying to control her anger. Listen, Winthrop, I respect everything you've built, but the world is changing. Clients want sustainable, technologically advanced, cost-effective buildings, not museum pieces. Percy understands that. He sees the future of the company. Why can't you? Because your future is faceless structures with no soul or personality. Because you're talking about business, and I'm talking about architecture. The art of creating spaces where people live, work, love, dream. It's not just square meters and materials. It's the story a building tells. Bridie rolled her eyes, a gesture she probably would have restrained in any other situation. See? You sound like an artist, not a businessman. That's why Percy thinks you'd be better off focusing on the creative side, leaving the management to us. Does Percy feel that way, or did you instill that thought in him? I asked bluntly. Her eyes narrowed. Don't make me out to be the villain manipulating your son. Percy is an intelligent, independent man. He sees the potential in the company that you stubbornly ignore because of your sentimentality. Then let's talk to him together. Now. Bridie looked at her watch. He has an investor meeting. A very important meeting, by the way. We're raising additional funding for expansion. What expansion? I was caught off guard again. When was this decided? Last week. Percy was going to discuss it with you after the terms were finalized. She headed for the door. Listen, Winthrop, there's no denying your accomplishments. But this company has grown from the days when all decisions were made by one man over a cup of coffee. We're becoming a corporation, with processes and structure. I sat still for a long time after she left. A corporation, not a family firm, not a creative studio, but a corporation. A faceless, profit-generating machine. Everything I'd always wanted to avoid. That evening, I tried calling Percy, but he didn't answer. I sent a message asking for a meeting. The reply didn't come until the next morning. All-day meeting today. Talk to you tomorrow at lunch? I agreed, but I was pretty sure the conversation would go nowhere. Percy had already made his choice. That afternoon, I decided to test how far my suspension from the company went. I asked Claire to find the latest financial statements and information on current projects. An hour later, she returned with a worried look on her face. Mr. Lloyd, I've been denied access to the financials. They said it's now strictly confidential information, available only to members of the executive committee. I'm the founder and majority owner, I reminded him. How could I not have access to my own company's finances? Claire looked confused. The new policy was approved by the board of directors last week. I can show you the minutes. I looked over the document, feeling my bewilderment growing. The minutes were impeccably written, with all the formalities. My signature was on the attendance list, even though I knew for a fact that I had not been at the meeting. It's a forgery, I said quietly. I didn't sign that document. Claire turned pale. Yeah, I don't know what to say, Mr. Lloyd. Don't worry, Claire. It's not your fault. I put my hand on her shoulder. Thank you for your loyalty. You're one of the few people I can still trust around here. At lunchtime, I went into Percy's office, but his secretary said he'd left for a meeting. I decided to wait for his return, but the hours passed and Percy didn't show up. At the end of the day, I received another message. Sorry, the meeting ran late. Tomorrow at 10 in the conference room on the second floor? Important conversation. Something about the wording made me wary. Percy never scheduled meetings for me in conference rooms. We always talked in my office or over lunch at a restaurant. Something was cooking, and I had a feeling I wasn't going to like it. I decided to prepare myself. When I got home, I went through all the documents concerning the company. Articles of incorporation, shareholder agreements, contracts. I still owned 55% of the stock. Percy had been transferred 30% when he turned 35. The remaining 15% was distributed to key employees. Technically, I still controlled the company. But then I remembered the expansion that Bridie had mentioned, about raising additional funding. What if that meant issuing new shares, diluting my stake? I called my longtime lawyer, Howard, waking him up at 11 o'clock at night. After briefly explaining the situation, I asked, could they issue new shares without my consent? Howard was quiet. According to the company's bylaws, no. It requires the consent of the controlling shareholder, which is you. But if they change the bylaws, they could have been changed at a board meeting, the one you were supposedly present at. I felt a chill run through my body. They forged my signature. That's a felony. If you can prove it, yes. But it'll be your word against the word of your son and daughter-in-law. Plus maybe the other board members, if they're in cahoots. What do I do, Howard? Come to that meeting tomorrow. Hear them out. But don't sign anything, absolutely nothing, and record the conversation. Deltona is a one-party consent state for recording. You don't have to notify them. I didn't sleep well that night. Nightmares of empty buildings, of my son turning his back on me, of Bridie laughing behind the glass walls of my former office. Waking up at 4 in the morning, I stared at the ceiling for a long time, trying to figure out where I'd made a mistake. When had I lost my son? When had I allowed a stranger to come into our company and take over? In the morning, I received an email with the subject line, Meeting Agenda. Official, impersonal. Attached was a 3-page document. LA Design Group Restructuring Plan. I opened it and felt the ground go from under my feet. It was a plan to completely reformat the company, a new organizational structure, a new division of responsibilities. And there, on the second page, under Leadership Changes, I saw this. Winthrop Lloyd moves to the position of Chairman Emeritus of the Board of Directors, a non-executive, non-signatory advisory role. They were going to remove me from running my own company, take away my decision-making power, turn me into a decorative figure, a living legend who is shown to clients to add weight but not listened to. I took a deep breath. Anger wouldn't help. I needed a cool head and a clear plan. I activated the recorder on my phone and headed to the meeting, ready to do battle for my life's work. I arrived at the office a half hour early for my appointment. I wanted to gather my thoughts, prepare for the confrontation. I was met in the lobby by the new receptionist, a young woman who clearly didn't know who I was. She politely asked me to wait and called upstairs. Mr. Lloyd is waiting for you, she said after a short conversation. I held back a bitter chuckle. Mr. Lloyd is me. I started this company, built this building, hired hundreds of people over the years, and now I'm being mistaken for a visitor in my own office. As I rode up the elevator, I felt strangely calm, like everything that was happening was just a bad dream I was about to wake up from. Percy would come to his senses. Bridie will show her true colors, and my son will see that I was right. We'll be back to normal. But deep down, I knew it was an illusion. Things had gone too far. Too many decisions had been made behind my back. Too many lies had accumulated between us. When I entered the conference room on the second floor, there was a small group of people already gathered there. Percy was sitting at the head of the table, the same place I always sat. Next to him was Bridie, impeccably dressed in a navy blue suit, a clipboard in front of her. Around the table sat the board members. James Patterson, an old family friend and our chief engineer. Lorraine Myers, the head of the legal department, recently hired by Bridie. Andrew Caulfield, the minority shareholder representative, and two men I didn't recognize in expensive suits. "Ah, Father," Percy rose, feigning cordiality. "Thank you for coming. We were just about to get started." I looked around. James and Andrew's faces were awkward. They avoided my gaze. Lorraine and the strangers maintained a professional indifference. Bridie, on the other hand, looked at me with barely concealed triumph. "I wasn't notified that this was a board meeting," I said, taking an empty seat. "Usually these meetings are announced in advance." "It's an informal discussion of strategic matters," Bridie said with a smile. "The formal meeting is scheduled for next week. Today we just wanted to present our vision for the future of the company." One of the strangers extended his hand to me. "Reed Silverstone, Arcade Capital." "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Lloyd. Your work has always been an inspiration to me." Jeff Norton introduced himself. "I represent Blue Stream Investors." Investors, the same ones Bridie was talking about. I shook their hands, keeping my composure. Percy coughed. "Let's get started. Time is of the essence." Bridie had prepared a presentation on the company's growth plans. Bridie rose from her seat, exuding confidence. For the next hour, I listened as my sister-in-law methodically took apart everything I'd spent 4 decades building. Every aspect of my business philosophy was presented as outdated, inefficient, sentimental. Our attention to detail, personalized approach to each project, deep client relationships, all of these were rebranded as unproductive practices of the past. Instead, Bridie suggested standardization, scaling, automation. She talked about modular solutions, streamlining processes, and maximizing profit per square foot. She presented plans to open offices in 3 new cities, hire 50 new employees, and develop proprietary architectural templates for rapid implementation. "With this approach, we can triple our productivity while minimizing cost increases," she concluded, showing a graph with an upward curve. "Our investors have agreed to provide the necessary funding for this expansion in exchange for 30% equity in the company." I tensed. 30%? That meant my stake would drop to 38.5%. I would lose my controlling interest. "And now for the management structure," Bridie continued, moving on to the next slide. "To implement our strategy effectively, we need a clear hierarchy with clear lines of responsibility." An organizational chart appeared on the screen. At the head is the CEO, Percy Lloyd. Beneath him is the CEO, Bridie Lloyd. Various departments and divisions, and somewhere on the side, separate from the main structure, Honorary Chairman, Winthrop Lloyd. "We feel that Winthrop would be more comfortable concentrating on his representative role," Bridie said in the third person, as if I wasn't in the room. "His experience and reputation are invaluable assets that we should use to strengthen the brand. But operational management requires, shall we say, a more modern approach." I listened to all of this while feeling anger building up inside me. Not just anger, rage. Cold, sharp rage. They weren't just suspending me. They were rewriting the history of the company, erasing everything I had accomplished, everything I believed in. "Does anyone have any questions?" Bridie asked, having finished her presentation. I slowly stood up. "Yes, I have a few questions," I began, trying to control my voice. "First, when was the decision made to change the course of the company so radically? Secondly, on what grounds are you planning to issue new shares without the approval of the controlling shareholder?" There was a heavy silence in the room. The investors exchanged concerned glances. James Patterson turned pale. Bridie kept her expression calm, but I could see her shoulders tense. "I don't know what you're talking about, Winthrop," she said with feigned surprise. "All decisions were made collegially in the board meetings you attended." "You're lying." I didn't raise my voice, but the words sounded like a whiplash. "I was not present at any meeting where these issues were discussed. My signature on the minutes is forged, and you both know it." Percy's face went black. "Father, that's a serious accusation. You were at those meetings. We all saw you." "Did we?" I looked around the room. "James, did you see me at the meeting where the reorganization was discussed?" James, my longtime colleague and friend, fidgeted in his chair. Yeah, uh, I can't remember exactly. Of course you can't, I interrupted him. Because I wasn't there. I only found out about the plans yesterday when I got the subpoena for today's meeting. Reed Silverstone cleared his throat. Mr. Lloyd, Jr., he turned to Percy, you assured us that the founder is in full support of the new direction. He is, Bridie interjected. Winthrop just forgets some things. It's natural at his age. I felt the blood rush to my face. I'm not forgetting, and you're not lying, I said quietly. You are purposely manipulating, distorting the facts and misleading everyone around you, including my son. Father, son, or Percy jumped up. You're out of line. Bridie works for the good of the company. She sees prospects that you refuse to recognize because of your stubbornness. And yes, let me be blunt, because of your age. Yes, I'll be blunt. Your age. I looked at my son, feeling something snap inside. My boy, the one I had raised alone, the one I had dedicated my life to, looked at me as an obstacle, a hindrance. Bridie made an annoyed sound. This is exactly what I'm talking about. She turned to the investors. Emotion instead of facts. Sentiment instead of strategy. Winthrop can't separate his personal feelings from his business decisions. And you can't understand that architecture is not just a business, I parried. It's art, it's heritage, it's a responsibility to the people who will live and work in the spaces we create. The soul doesn't make a profit, Bridie retorted. And that's why the company under your leadership has been stagnant for the last 10 years, while the competition has grown and grown. Lorraine Myers, head of the legal department, coughed and pulled out a folder. Mr. Lloyd, according to the revised articles of incorporation adopted at the board meeting 2 weeks ago, the issuance of new shares requires a simple majority vote of the board, not the consent of the controlling shareholder. I froze. That's impossible. The bylaws can't be changed without my consent. They can, Lorraine countered. If the change is approved by a 2/3 vote of the board of directors and signed by the chairman of the board, we have all the signatures we need, including yours. I didn't sign anything, I said, my voice hoarse with restrained anger. Here's a document with your signature on it. Lorraine put the paper in front of me. I looked at the signature. It looked like mine, but it's a forgery, I said, looking up at Bridie. You forged my signature. Father, you signed that document, Percy insisted. I was there. Maybe you just don't remember. You've been forgetting things a lot lately. Bridie laughed, a cold, unpleasant laugh. Fighting it? At your age? Winthrop, be realistic. You're 75 years old. You don't have the energy or time for a long legal battle. I headed for the door, but her next words stopped me. Juanin, weak-minded old people don't belong here. Get out! There was dead silence in the room. The investors looked shocked. James Patterson closed his eyes as if he didn't want to see what was happening. Even Lorraine Myers, a staunch ally of Bridie's, seemed confused. I turned around slowly. What did you say? Bridie, realizing she'd gone too far, tried to soften the situation. Yeah, I didn't mean it. Just in the heat of an argument. No, that's exactly what you meant. I looked her straight in the eye. You've finally shown your true colors. I looked at my son. And you let her talk to your father like that? Silent when she insults the man who gave you life, who raised you, who created the company you're sitting in now? Percy looked shocked, but couldn't find the strength to object. He remained silent, his eyes downcast. His silence was more eloquent than any words. I understand, I said quietly. It was clear. I turned to the investors. Gentlemen, I advise you to check all the documents carefully before investing in this company. And think about whether you want to deal with people who forge signatures and cheat their own family. With those words, I walked out of the conference room with my head held high and straight. Only when the door closed behind me did I let myself exhale. My knees were shaking. Blood pounded in my temples. But I couldn't allow myself to be weak. Not now. I walked through the office, feeling the stares of the staff. They must have heard the raised voices from the conference room, maybe even Bridie's last sentence. I saw a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, and awkwardness in their eyes. In the elevator, I found myself alone. As the doors closed, I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Pain and humiliation came over me in a wave. Weak-minded old people don't belong here. Those words stung more than I could have imagined. Not so much the words themselves, I'd heard worse insults in my long life, but the fact that my son had let it happen. Didn't intercede, didn't object. Just sat there and remained silent as his wife insulted his father. I walked out of the building without looking back. Everything I loved, everything I had dedicated my life to, was left there, in the hands of people who didn't understand or appreciate it. I was devastated, crushed, humiliated, but somewhere deep inside, beneath the layers of pain and disappointment, a spark of anger was beginning to smolder. Not just anger, righteous indignation. Did they think they could just displace me? Steal my business, my name, my reputation? Cheat and humiliate me without consequence? It was time to act. I walked out of the office building, feeling the sun beat down on my eyes, blinding me for a moment. The world around me seemed wrong, distorted, as if I was looking at it through a crooked glass. I had just been publicly humiliated, insulted, and effectively ostracized from the company I had created. My daughter-in-law had called me a feeble-minded old man, and my son had remained silent, not standing up for me. I got into my car but didn't drive home. Instead, I headed to the old Blue Note Jazz Bar 2 blocks from the office. Archibald Harrison, my oldest client and friend, and I had often met here in earlier years. At this time of day, the bar was practically empty, the perfect place to gather my thoughts and plan my actions. I ordered a double scotch, even though I don't usually drink until the evening. Tonight could be an exception. Seated in a corner booth, I pulled out my phone and notepad. I had a task in front of me that required strategic thinking and quick decisions. The first thing I did was call Howard Phelps, my attorney, with whom we had worked for over 30 years. "Howard, I need your help." "It's urgent," I said as soon as he picked up the phone. The situation was developing faster than we had anticipated. I summarized the morning meeting, the forging of my signature, and Bridie's final insult. "Oh my God," Howard exhaled. "This isn't just a family conflict anymore. It's fraud. Forgery is a felony." "I don't want to involve my son in a criminal case," I countered, "but I can't let them steal my company." "I see. What's your plan?" I took a sip of scotch, feeling the warmth spread through my body. Right now, the most important thing is to stop the investor deal. If Bridie and Percy get additional financing in exchange for 30% of the stock, I'll lose control. We need to convince the investors to back off on this deal. "Do you have any leverage with them?" "Maybe. Reed Silverstone at Arcade Capital and Jeff Norton at Bluestream Investors. I don't know them personally, but I know people who can influence them." "Act fast, Winthrop. If the paperwork's ready, they can close the deal within a day. You prepare a lawsuit to invalidate all the documents with my forged signature and find a good forensic graphologist. I need proof of forgery." "I'll get right on it. Keep me posted." Finished talking, I opened my notebook and started making a list. The first thing I needed to do was to contact people who could influence potential investors. In 42 years in the architecture business, I had acquired an extensive network of contacts. I started with Miriam Cantor, widow of my old friend Joseph Cantor, founder of one of the largest banks on the East Coast. Miriam retained considerable influence in financial circles after her husband's death. "Son, Winthrop, what a pleasant surprise." Her voice was warm and sincere. "Rebecca and I were just remembering you yesterday. The summer house you designed for us in Cape Cod is still admired by all the guests." "Glad to hear it, Miriam, but I'm afraid I'm not calling for small talk. I need your help." I told her the situation without going into family details, but clearly outlining the attempted takeover of the company and the forgery of documents. "Terrible," Miriam said indignantly. "Joseph always admired your integrity in business. He said you were one of the few people who never compromised principles for profit. What can I do for you?" "Do you know Reed Silverstone from Arcade Capital?" Miriam laughed. "Do I know Reed? My dear, I was at his wedding and at both his children's christenings. What's more, our bank financed his first investment fund when no one believed in his approach. It was exactly the connection I was hoping for. I need to meet with him as soon as possible. Today. He's one of the investors willing to put money into the company under new management. I'll call him right now." Miriam said firmly. West Soning, where are you now? At the Blue Note. Perfect. I'll tell him to meet you there in, say, 30 minutes? Next on my list was Archibald Harrison. I knew he wasn't just my client. His family had had considerable influence in Deltona business circles for 3 generations. Archie, I need information on Jeff Norton of Blue Stream Investors, I said as soon as he picked up the phone. Norton, Archibald clarified. I've met him at a few fundraisers. Ambitious, but seems honest. What happened? I summarized the situation, knowing I could trust Archibald. Damn it, Winthrop, this is your company. Your name on the sign. How dare they? Exactly, and I need to stop them before it's too late. Can you help me get in touch with Norton? Better. I can get you dirt on him, Archibald said with determination. Last year, Blue Stream invested in a redevelopment project in Brooklyn's historic district. They promised to preserve the historic look, but as soon as they got the permits, they started demolishing old buildings and building standard office centers. There was a scandal, but they covered it up by paying off the right people. I don't think Norton would like it if it came up again. The third call I made was to Edgar Ramirez, a financial analyst I had worked with in recent years. Edgar was young, just over 30, but he had already earned a reputation as a brilliant specialist with an almost photographic memory for numbers. Mr. Lloyd, it's good to hear from you. His energetic voice always lifted my spirits. Edgar, I have an urgent matter for you. I need a complete financial analysis of Lloyd Architects for the last 3 years. Every project, every expenditure, every movement of funds, and especially every decision made since Bridie became CFO. It's a lot of work, Edgar said cautiously. It usually takes several days to analyze it. I have 3 hours, I said firmly. I know it's almost impossible, but you're the only one who can do it. Edgar was silent for a few seconds. Okay, I'll do it, but I'll need access to all of the company's financial records. That's a problem. I've been effectively removed from management. I don't have access to the current financial statements. Edgar thought for a moment. Do you have copies of previous reports? The ones from before Bridie came in? Yes, I have copies of every annual report since the company was founded, and quarterly reports for the last 10 years. That's good. That should be enough to get you started. I can establish basic financial patterns and trends. And for the last year, there are other sources of information. What are they? You don't want to know, Mr. Lloyd. Edgar's voice took on a conspiratorial tone. Second, let's just say I have friends in the IRS who can provide certain information without breaking the law. Too much. I decided not to elaborate on the details. Exactly 30 minutes after my conversation with Miriam, the door of the Blue Note opened and Reed Silverstone walked in, a tall, trim man of about 45, with attentive eyes and confident movements. He looked around, spotted me, and headed toward my table. Mr. Lloyd, he held out his hand. Miriam was very insistent in her request to see you immediately, said it was a matter of the utmost importance. Thank you for taking the time, Mr. Silverstone. I pointed to the chair opposite. Have a seat. And yes, it is indeed urgent. It's about the reputation of your foundation and the significant financial risks involved. Silverstone tensed but kept his composure. I'm all ears. You're going to invest in LA Design Group, formerly Lloyd Architects, I began. But you've been misled about a few key points. First, I never agreed to change the company's strategy. My signature on the documents was forged. That's a serious accusation. Silverstone frowned. Do you have proof? I'll have it by the end of the day. I've already hired an expert graphologist and prepared a lawsuit. But it's more than that. You've been presented with a distorted financial picture of the company. I explained to him that while my outdated approach was criticized, it was the one that kept the company stable and profitable over the long term. We had never chased short-term gains at the expense of quality and reputation. After meeting with Silverstone, I also had time to speak with Jeff Norton, who was more skeptical. With all due respect, Mr. Lloyd, he said after my explanation, but this looks like an attempt by an older man to retain control of a company that has outgrown him. Progress is inevitable. Businesses must evolve, adapt. Progress, yes, I agreed, but what Bridie is proposing is not progress. It's degradation, turning an architectural atelier into a factory of standard solutions. It's like replacing a craftsman's handiwork with assembly line production. Seeing his hesitation, I decided to hint at Archibald's information. What about reputational risks? I spoke softly without direct threats. Your foundation has recently been actively promoting the image of a socially responsible investor who cares about the long-term impact of his projects. After that unpleasant story in Brooklyn, it's especially important, isn't it? Norton visibly tensed. You're well informed. I have many friends, Mr. Norton, and a long memory, but I'm not threatening you. Just pointing out the fact that investing in a company that abandons its core values in favor of short-term gain may not be consistent with your foundation's new image. Exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes after our conversation, Edgar Ramirez sent me an email with a detailed financial analysis. I reviewed the documents on my tablet, and even my inexperienced eye could see the obvious inconsistencies and manipulation of numbers. According to Edgar's analysis, Bridie had used several questionable techniques to artificially improve financial performance. Deferred payments to vendors, aggressive revenue recognition before projects were actually completed, and reduced spending on quality control and staff training. All of this created the illusion of rapid growth, but undermined the company's long-term stability. I immediately forwarded this analysis to both investors with a brief cover letter explaining the key points. Then I called Howard to check on the progress of the lawsuit. The documents are almost ready, he said. An expert graphologist has already examined samples of your signature and those on the disputed documents. According to his preliminary conclusion, it is definitely a forgery. We can file a lawsuit tomorrow morning. I looked at my watch. It had been almost 3 hours since I'd left the office. Bridie and Percy had probably already realized that something wasn't going according to plan if the investors had delayed signing the documents. I needed to act quickly. I arranged a meeting with both investors in a conference room at the Deltona Plaza Hotel to present Edgar's analysis and answer any questions they had. They brought their financial analysts with them, 2 from each company. I spent the next hour and a half methodically going through Edgar's financial analysis, answering the analyst's questions, and explaining the nuances of the architecture business that made Bridie's promised explosive growth unrealistic. I talked about reputational risks, about the long-term consequences of reduced quality, about how effective solutions today turn into costly problems tomorrow. Gradually, I saw the mood in the room change. Skepticism was giving way to concern. Analysts exchanged anxious glances. Silverstone asked increasingly specific questions about Bridie's methods. Even Norton began to take notes, frowning his eyebrows. If what you say is true, Mr. Lloyd, Silverstone said at last, then this investment carries far more risk than we had originally thought. Not to mention the legal problems associated with falsifying documents, I added. Investing in a company involved in such a scandal could be a serious blow to your fund's reputation. Silverstone and Norton looked at each other. Say, I'll have to discuss it with the partners, Silverstone said. But personally, I'm inclined to put the deal on hold until the situation is fully clarified. I agree, Norton nodded. There are too many unanswered questions, too many questionable practices. We can't risk the reputation of the foundation. When they left, I allowed myself a moment of triumph. In 3 hours, I'd managed to convince key investors to back out of the Bridie and Percy deal. Without that investment, their plan to take control of the company was falling apart. My phone rang. Howard. Winthrop, great news. Judge Ramirez has agreed to hear our motion for a temporary restraining order against any dealings in Lloyd Architects stock tomorrow morning. Given the preliminary report from the forensics expert, we have a good chance. Thank you, Howard. You're doing great as always. How are you doing with the investors? I think they're going to back out of the deal. Edgar's analysis made a strong impression on them. That's great, so we're in for round 1. I finished talking and leaned back in my chair, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and fatigue. It had been a busy but productive day. In a matter of hours, I'd managed to mobilize my connections, gather evidence, and convince powerful people that I was right. Bridie and Percy had grossly underestimated me. I may be an old man, but I'm certainly not feeble-minded, and I still have enough power and influence to protect what I created with my own hands. This battle isn't over, but I've struck the first decisive blow. Leaving the hotel after the investor meeting, I decided not to return home. My apartment seemed too empty, too quiet for the storm of emotions raging inside me. Instead, I drove to my country home 30 miles outside of Deltona, a lakeside retreat where I used to come to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and work on new projects in silence. The house greeted me with a coolness and the smell of pine boards. I hadn't been here much in recent months. I was too busy trying to keep control of the company. Opening the windows to let in fresh air, I walked to the terrace overlooking the lake. The evening sun was coloring the water golden, a light breeze rippling the surface. A peaceful picture, a stark contrast to the chaos of the last few days. I settled into the wicker chair, placing my phone on the table beside me. The screen was dark, but I knew it would soon come to life. Bridie and Percy would inevitably try to contact me when they realized their plans were falling apart. I waited for that moment with a strange calmness. An hour later, the phone vibrated. Percy's name popped up on the screen. I didn't answer, just watched the call go to missed. 2 minutes later, it rang again, and again. After the fifth missed call came a message. "Father, we need to talk. It's urgent. Please call back." I grinned. Urgent? When I tried to talk to him about rebranding the company, about hijacking my projects, about forging my signature, it wasn't urgent. When Bridie humiliated me at the meeting, it wasn't urgent. And now that their plans were falling apart, there was a sudden urgency. 15 minutes later, the phone came alive again. This time it was Bridie calling. I rejected the call and muted it. Let her leave voice messages. I'd listen to them later when I was ready. The sunset over the lake was gorgeous. Red gold rays pierced the clouds, creating fantastic patterns in the sky. I thought about how often architecture tries to imitate these natural lines and colors, and how rarely it truly succeeds. Maybe that's what true art is all about. Not trying to outdo nature, but humbling yourself to its perfection and trying to create something that harmonizes with it. My company has always followed this principle. The buildings we designed fit into the landscape, complementing it, not fighting it. We used natural materials, natural light, open spaces. Our architecture breathed with its surroundings. Now Bridie wanted to turn all of this into efficient modular solutions, standardized blocks that could be stamped one after another without thinking about the soul of the place, about the people who would live and work in these buildings. She was only interested in numbers in spreadsheets, growth charts, profit maximization. I sighed. Maybe I really am outdated. Maybe there is no place in the modern world for architecture as an art, for an individual approach to each project. Maybe the future lies in generic solutions and algorithmic design. But if that's the case, I'm glad I belong to a bygone era. I don't want to be part of a world where beauty and soul are sacrificed for efficiency and profit. The phone continued to vibrate. Now the calls alternated. Percy, Bridie, Percy again. I imagined them sitting in the office, panicking, trying to figure out what went wrong with their perfect plan. How angry they were at me for daring to resist, for not giving up, for not going quietly into the shadows like they expected. It got dark. I lit the lamps on the terrace and poured myself a glass of red wine from the bottle I kept here for special occasions. The 50-year-old Bordeaux was a gift from a French client for whom we designed the winery. Today definitely deserved such a wine. I scrolled through the list of missed calls. 12 from Percy, 9 from Bridie, 3 from Lorraine Myers, the company lawyer. Voice messages. I decided to listen to them, starting with the earliest. "Father, it's Percy. We need to talk. The situation has gotten complicated. Please call me back." "Winthrop, it's Bridie. I understand you're upset, but we need to discuss the situation like adults. Call me when you get this message." "Father, it's me again. The investors have postponed signing the documents. They say they want to do some additional due diligence." "What did you tell them?" "Please call me back." "Mr. Lloyd, this is Lorraine Myers. I need to discuss with you urgently some legal matters related to the company. Please contact me as soon as possible." The messages grew more desperate as time went on. "Winthrop, this is Bridie. Silverstone just sent an email saying they are considering pulling out of the deal due to newly discovered circumstances." "What have you done? Do you realize you've jeopardized the future of the company?" "Father, for God's sake, answer me. Norton is backing out of the deal too. They're talking about some financial analysis you provided them. We need to talk before things finally fall apart." The last message from Bridie was recorded just 20 minutes ago. "Winthrop, this is a disaster. Both investors have backed out of the deal. They're talking fraud, manipulation of financial statements, falsification of documents. They're threatening to report it to the SEC. You have to help us fix this. Call me, please. Her voice shook with panic. The same woman who a few hours ago had arrogantly called me a feeble-minded old man was now begging for my help. The irony of the situation didn't escape me. The phone vibrated again. This time it was Howard, my lawyer. I decided to answer it. Winthrop, are you okay? He sounded genuinely concerned. I'm fine, Howard. I'm enjoying the view of the lake and listening to the panicked milling of rats on a sinking ship. Howard grinned. According to my sources, the LA Design Group office is in chaos right now. The two investors didn't just back out of the deal, they spread the word of the potential fraud among their colleagues. Now no self-respecting investment fund will do business with the company until the situation is cleared up. What about the lawsuit? It's all set. I'm filing in court tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Preliminary report from the forensic graphologist confirms the signature was forged. Judge Ramirez has already indicated he's leaning toward granting our motion for a temporary restraining order against any dealings in the company's assets. Okay, I took a sip of wine. What about Percy and Bridie? Have they tried to contact you? Yeah, Bridie called. She was very, emotional, threatened to countersuit, accused you of sabotage, said something about age-related incapacity. When I reminded her that forgery is a felony, she quickly changed her tune. She started saying that it was all a misunderstanding, that she had always respected you and only wanted what was best for the company. I shook my head. Typical Bridie, manipulative to the core. And Percy? Howard sighed. He'd called too. He sounded depressed. Said he didn't know about the forgery, that Bridie had assured him you'd agreed to all the changes. I don't know if that's true or not, but he seemed genuinely remorseful. I wondered. I wanted to believe that my son wasn't directly involved in the fraud, that he was a victim of Bridie's manipulations, not a conscious participant in a conspiracy against me. But even if that was true, did that excuse his silence when his wife humiliated me? His willingness to believe that I'd suddenly agreed to give up everything I'd dedicated my life to? The phone rang again. This time I decided to answer it out of curiosity, not sympathy. Yes, I said coldly. Winthrop. Bridie's voice sounded both surprised and relieved. At last, I've been trying to reach you all evening. I know. Listen, we need to talk. This situation. It's a misunderstanding. A big misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I couldn't contain my bitter laughter. You forged my signature on official documents, hijacked my projects, lied to clients and investors on my behalf, and then called me a feeble-minded old man in front of the board of directors. And all of this is a misunderstanding? That's not what I meant. There was panic in her voice. I was upset, disappointed. You didn't want to see the potential of the company, the opportunities for growth. I tried to show you how we could grow, but you clung to the old ways. And that justifies fraud? I asked calmly. It wasn't a fake, she countered quickly. Just a simplification of procedure. You'd still agree if you understood the benefits. I was just trying to save time, to avoid unnecessary arguments. By signing documents that take away my control over my own company instead of mine? I shook my head even though she couldn't see it. Bridie, we both know it was fraud, and now you're facing the consequences. What did you tell the investors? There was an accusatory tone in her voice. Shubranawam, what lies did you tell them to get them to back out of the deal? I told them the truth. I showed them the real financials, not your manipulations. I told them about the forged documents, how you used my name and reputation to promote your version of the company's future. You destroyed everything we'd built. She was almost screaming now. Years of work, planning, all wasted because of your selfishness, your inability to let go of control. I protected the company I built, I replied firmly. A company you tried to turn into a conveyor belt of faceless boxes for a quick profit. And now what? She tried to regain her composure. You're going to sue us? Press charges of fraud? Destroy your own son's career out of pride? The lawsuit is ready, I said. Howard's filing it in court tomorrow morning. As for the criminal charges, that will depend on many factors, including how cooperative you are in restoring the company to legitimate leadership. "You can't do this to us," she exclaimed. "To your own family." "Family?" My voice became harsher. "You called me a feeble-minded old man and told me to get lost." My son was sitting next to me, silent. "What kind of family's that, Bridie?" She was quiet for a moment, apparently realizing that this argument wasn't working. "What do you want?" she finally asked. "What's your price?" "I want to take back control of my company. I want all documents with forged signatures to be invalidated. I want Lloyd Architects to be Lloyd Architects again, not LA Design Group." I hung up without waiting for her reply. The phone rang again almost immediately. "Percy." I didn't answer it. Too many emotions had come over me after talking to Bridie. I needed time to collect my thoughts. I stepped out onto the shore of the lake. The moon was painting a silvery path on the dark water. The stars seemed especially bright away from the city lights. I breathed deeply of the cool air, filled with the scents of pine and water. 42 years ago, I founded Lloyd Architects with the sole purpose of creating buildings that were not just functional structures, but works of art, places where people could live life to the fullest. I believe that architecture should inspire, should lift people above the ordinary, should tell stories. And now at 75, I have fought to preserve that philosophy so that my legacy would not be distorted, would not be turned into a conveyor belt for the production of faceless boxes to maximize profits. But the fight wasn't just for the company. It was for my son, for his soul, for him to remember what I taught him all those years ago, for him to see architecture as an art again, not just a business, for him to realize that success is measured not only by money and status, but also by being true to your principles, the quality of your work, and the legacy you leave behind. I didn't know if I could ever fully trust Percy again after his betrayal. I didn't know if he could redeem himself in my eyes. I didn't know what would happen to his marriage, to his future in the company, to our relationship. But I knew one thing for sure. I would not go down without a fight. I will not let them steal what I created with my hands, my mind, my heart. I will not let them destroy my legacy. The phone rang again. I looked at the screen. Percy. Maybe it was time to listen to him. Maybe it was time to give him a chance to explain his actions, his motives. Maybe in his words, I'd find at least a shadow of the boy I'd raised, the young man I believed in, the heir I wanted to pass on my life's work to. But I didn't answer. It was not yet time. First, I had to regain control of the company, regain what was rightfully mine. And then we'll talk. About betrayal, about forgiveness, about the future, if we have one. I returned to the house feeling tired, but also strangely peaceful. Today I had struck a decisive blow. Today I showed them that a 75-year-old feeble-minded old man is still capable of standing up for himself. Today I proved that experience and connections gained over a long life are sometimes worth more than youth and ambition. Tomorrow will be a new day, new battles. But today the victory was mine. It had been 3 weeks since my world had been turned upside down. 3 weeks of court hearings, depositions, expert testimony, 3 weeks of newspaper headlines, gossip in architectural circles, awkward glances from former co-workers in chance encounters. 3 weeks without a single conversation with his son. The trial ended quicker than I expected. The evidence was overwhelming. Forged signatures, manipulation of financial statements, violation of corporate bylaws. Bridie didn't even try to really defend herself. Her lawyer focused on trying to minimize damages rather than deny the obvious. Percy, as he claimed in his communications, really had no knowledge of the document forgeries. That was confirmed during the investigation. But he knew about the rest of it. The manipulation of accounting records, the plans to remove me, the lying to investors. He was complicit, even if not the principal perpetrator. That truth was more bitter than I was willing to admit. The court ruled in my favor. All documents with forged signatures were invalidated, and control of the company was returned to the rightful owner. Bridie was facing criminal prosecution for fraud, but I didn't press charges. Not out of pity for her, but out of reluctance to drag the company's name into a bigger scandal. Besides, the stain on her reputation was already indelible. No self-respecting firm would hire her now. But regaining legal control of the company was only half the battle. Lloyd Architects, or LA Design Group, as it had managed to rename itself, was in dire straits. Investors had broken off all agreements, key clients had left, and employees were looking for new jobs. The reputational damage was enormous. I sat in my office, mine again after 3 weeks away, and reviewed the latest financial reports. The numbers were disappointing. Without an immediate injection of capital, the company would last a month at the most. It needed new clients, new projects, a rebuilding of market confidence. But all of that took time, which we didn't have. Claire, my trusty assistant, knocked on the door. "Mr. Lloyd, you have a visitor. He says he has an appointment." I frowned. There were no appointments on my schedule today. "Who is it?" "Mr. Alistair Brooks from Vanguard Design." That name instantly caught my attention. Alistair Brooks was the founder and principal of one of the most successful architectural firms on the East Coast, our longtime competitor. Unlike most of their competitors, Vanguard Design had always maintained high standards of quality and innovation. I respected their work, although I had never gotten to know Brooks personally. "Sinon, invite him in," I said, rising from the table. Alistair Brooks was a trim man of about 65, with shrewd gray eyes and impeccable posture. He entered the office with the confidence of a man accustomed to success. "Mr. Lloyd," he shook my hand. "Thank you for agreeing to see me without prior arrangement." "I confess I am intrigued," I replied, pointing to the visitor's chair. "To what do I owe the visit of such an esteemed competitor?" Brooks smiled. "Perhaps after our conversation, we will no longer be competitors." He paused. "I've been following the developments around your company. It's a very unpleasant situation. Family conflicts in business are always painful." I tensed, but decided to keep a diplomatic tone. "The business press has covered it in great detail. I don't see the point in discussing the details." "Shut." "Of course. Of course." Brooks raised his hand in a conciliatory gesture. "I'm not here to reopen your wounds or gather gossip. I have a specific business proposition." He pulled an elegant folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table in front of me. "Vanguard Design is interested in acquiring Lloyd Architects." I froze. This was something I hadn't expected. "Acquisition?" "A merger, if you prefer that formulation." Brooks smiled. "Gershonen, I've long admired your approach to architecture, Winthrop. Your attention to detail, your desire to create not just buildings, but spaces in which people want to live and work. It's a philosophy close to avant-garde design." I opened the folder. Inside was a detailed draft agreement. The figures were surprisingly generous, given the current state of the company. "It's more than Lloyd Architects is worth in its current position," I remarked bluntly. "I'm not just buying assets and a client base," Brooks replied. "I'm buying a heritage, a philosophy, an approach, and, if you agree, your experience and talent." I raised an eyebrow. "Go ahead." "I'm offering you a seat on the board of directors of the combined company and a position as chief creative development consultant. You will work with our leading architects, sharing your vision, your expertise. No administrative routine, no financial reports, no resource optimization meetings, just pure creativity." The offer sounded tempting, too tempting. "What about the employees of Lloyd Architects?" I asked. "We'll keep all the key specialists. They will get the same opportunities as the employees of Vanguard Design." "And the name? The brand?" Brooks wrinkled his nose slightly. "Here, I'm afraid, we'll have to compromise. Vanguard Design will be the main brand, but we can keep Lloyd in the name of some divisions or design lines." I nodded, mulling over his words. The offer was reasonable, even generous. In the current situation, it might be the best thing for the company, for the employees who'd stayed loyal to me all these years. But something inside resisted. "What about my son?" I asked. "Percy still owned 30% of the stock." Brooks's expression became more restrained. "We're willing to buy him out at market value. But I have to be frank, we don't see a place for him in the merged company. His reputation has been damaged by recent events." I couldn't agree more. Percy had made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. But he was still my son, my only child, my blood. "I need time to think," I said finally. "This is not a decision that can be made in one conversation." "Of course," Brooks stood up. "You have a week. Then I'll be forced to withdraw the offer." After he left, I sat still for a long time, staring at the folder with the offer. Part of me wanted to accept it immediately. It would solve all the financial problems, save the company from bankruptcy, secure the future of the employees, and I wouldn't have to fight the mills anymore. I could focus on what I really loved, designing, creating, making spaces that would outlive me. But the other part resisted. Lloyd Architects wasn't just a company. It was my life, my legacy. The idea of putting it in the wrong hands, even in the hands of a respected competitor, felt like a betrayal of everything I'd worked for. And then there was Percy. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't just cut him out of my life, out of the future of the company. He'd made a mistake, a serious, unforgivable mistake, but he was still my son. I picked up the phone and called Howard. I needed advice from a friend, not just a lawyer. So, it's a good offer, he said after listening to me. Financially and legally, it's probably the best you can get under the circumstances. But humanly? Howard sighed. Humanly. This is your company, Winthrop. You built it from the ground up. You put your heart into it. Only you can decide if you're willing to give it up, even on the best terms. What about Percy? So, he's a grown man, Howard's voice hardened. He made his choice when he sided with Bridie, when he let her manipulate him against his own father, when he kept quiet while she humiliated you in front of the board. I knew Howard was right, and yet, he's my only son, I said quietly. I know, and that's why you're in so much pain, Howard said quietly. Sure, Mon. Look, why don't you talk to him before you make a decision? Maybe he's really remorseful. Maybe you can find some kind of compromise. I thought about what he said. For 3 weeks, I had ignored all of Percy's attempts to contact me. Maybe it was time to hear him out. The next morning, I called my son. He answered after the first dial tone, as if he'd been sitting with the phone in his hand, waiting for my call. Dad? I could hear distrust and hope in his voice. Percy, I tried to keep my voice steady. We need to talk, in person. Come to the lake house at 4 o'clock tonight. I will, he answered without hesitation. I arrived early to prepare for the conversation. The lake house had always helped me to think more clearly, to see things in perspective. Here, away from the hustle and bustle of the city, problems seemed both smaller and clearer. Percy arrived right on time. He looked gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes and the stubble he usually shaved off. His usually immaculate suit was wrinkled, as if he'd slept in it. Father? He paused on the threshold, hesitant to enter uninvited. Come in, I pointed to the terrace. We can talk outside. We sat down in the wicker chairs looking out at the lake. We were silent for a while, not knowing where to begin. Finally, Percy spoke. I know that no apology will make up for what I did. His voice was quiet but firm. I betrayed your trust, allowed Bridie to manipulate me, didn't stop her when she insulted you. He swallowed. There's no excuse for my actions. I could say I was blinded by ambition, that I believed in her vision for the future of the company, that I didn't know about the forged documents. All of that was true, but it wasn't an excuse. I looked at my son, trying to see in this broken man the boy I'd raised, the young man I was proud of. What happened to you, Percy? I asked quietly. When did you stop believing in what I taught you? When did the numbers in the spreadsheets become more important than quality of work, more important than honesty, more important than family? Percy lowered his eyes. I don't know. It happened gradually, almost imperceptibly. Bridie can be very persuasive. He shook his head. No, it's not her fault. I'm a grown man. I could have said no. I could have insisted. I could have protected you when she overstepped her bounds. But you didn't, I said. No, he agreed. And now I have to live with the consequences of my choices. What about Bridie? His face darkened. We broke up. After the trial, she went to her parents in Boston. Said I was too weak to be with a woman like her. That I didn't live up to her expectations. I had no sympathy for Bridie, but I felt sorry for my son. One way or another, he'd lost the wife he'd lived with for 3 years against all odds. I'm sorry, I said. Don't be, Percy grinned bitterly. You were right about her all along. I just didn't want to see it. We were silent again. The sun was slowly sinking toward the horizon, painting the lake a golden color. Finally, I decided to move on to the main purpose of the conversation. I got an offer from Vanguard Design, I said. They want to buy Lloyd Architects. Percy looked up sharply. And you're going to take it? I haven't decided yet. I wanted to talk to you first. Me? I could hear the surprise in his voice. After everything I've done? You still own 30% of the stock, I reminded him, and you're still my son. My only son. Percy stared at me with an unreadable expression. What does the offer say? I summarized Brooks' terms, including that there would be no place for Percy in the merged company. That's fair, he said, after listening to me. I wouldn't have hired myself after what happened either. And you're willing to sell your share? I'll do what's best for the company, he answered firmly. If you think this offer is the best way out, I'll support your decision. I looked at my son carefully, trying to see if he was sincere or playing a game again. But all I saw in his eyes was tiredness and humility. What will you do? I asked. After the sale of the company? Percy shrugged. I don't know. My reputation in architectural circles is ruined. I don't think anyone would want to hire someone who was involved in trying to raid his own family's company, he said quietly. Maybe I'll start over, in a different field, in a different city. The thought of my son leaving, starting a new life away from me, caused unexpected pain. Despite everything that had happened, he was still my child. And perhaps now, as he was broken and remorseful, we had a chance for a fresh start. But there was another thought that had been on my mind ever since I'd received Brooks's offer. A thought that both terrified and inspired me at the same time. What if I didn't sell the company? I asked suddenly. Percy looked at me in surprise. But the financial situation, without an infusion of capital. I know, I interrupted him. The situation is critical. But what if there is another way? Over the next hour, I told my son about the plan that had begun to form in my head after Brooks's visit. A plan that seemed crazy at first, but the more I thought about it, the more feasible it seemed. Instead of selling Lloyd Architects, I could start a new company. A small, high-end architecture studio focused on innovative, sustainable projects. I would bring in a few key people loyal to my vision. I would start from scratch, without the burden of scandal and betrayal associated with the Lloyd Architects name. But what would happen to the old company? Percy asked. The employees? We can offer Brooks another deal, I replied. Not a merger, but a buyout of most of the assets and the hiring of staff. That would give us the capital to start a new project and provide jobs for the employees. And my share? You could sell it to Brooks with the rest of the assets, I said. Or, I paused, not sure if I was ready to take the next step. Or, Percy nudged me. Or you could join me, the words came out before I could think about them. Start from scratch. Prove that you've learned your lesson, that you're still your father's son. Percy stared at me wide-eyed. Will you give me a second chance? After everything? A second chance, yes. I looked him straight in the eye. But not forgiveness. Not yet. You have to earn that. He nodded slowly, understanding. I'll work every day to prove I'm worthy of this chance, that I was worthy of being your son. A month later, I was sitting in the new office of Winthrop Lloyd & Associates, a small but elegant space in a historic building in downtown Deltona. With me were the 5 architects who had decided to join my new project, including Claire, my faithful assistant, and Percy, who started in the lowest position possible, associate designer. The deal with Vanguard Design was a success. Brooks was disappointed not to get a full merger, but agreed to buy most of Lloyd Architects' assets and hire most of the staff. The company I created 42 years ago has officially ceased to exist. But its spirit, its philosophy, its approach to architecture as art, all of that now lived on in the new studio. On my desk was a letter from Archibald Harrison, an official invitation to participate in a competition to design a new cultural center for his foundation. A large, prestigious project that could be the perfect launch for a new company. I looked out the window at the city I had changed so many times with my designs. At 75, after betraying the people closest to me, I was starting over. A new company, new projects, new challenges. Many people my age had long ago enjoyed a well-deserved vacation, playing with grandchildren, traveling the world. But not me. The fire of creativity was still burning in me. The desire to create, to change the world for the better with the help of architecture. And maybe it wasn't too late to pass that passion on to my son, to give him a second chance to become a man I could be proud of. I hadn't forgiven Percy. Not yet. The wound of betrayal was too fresh. But I'd given him a chance to redeem himself, to prove that the boy who'd once looked at me with admiration when I'd shown him how lines on paper turned into buildings that changed the skyline of a city was still alive in him. I picked up a pencil and began to make the first sketches of the Harrison Cultural Center. My hand moved confidently, without the tremor that many would expect from someone my age. The lines lay on the paper crisp and bold, creating an image of a building that would stand long after I was gone. Do feeble-minded old men not belong here? Maybe, but I was far from feeble-minded, and I was ready to prove it to the world, once again.